A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Okay, hey everybody on the live stream. Not that many people care about the live stream. Everybody just
It's
wants
kind of
to.
fun, you know.
It's fun. It's a nice thing to do.
Looks like a live sporting event almost.
Yeah, you might get a couple questions. Hey everybody in the chat room. Hey everyone. Hey everyone. So I'm on the live stream, but it's not showing. It's showing a title card, and it says 3 minutes to go.
Yeah, that's 14 seconds behind local time, so
Yeah, what you should do just in the future is it's good to have the countdown clock. That's awesome. I would show the room like on the wide shot, but just have the sound off. Because then they'll see people walking around doing stuff and they'll be like, oh, something's about to go down. This is great. Okay, hey, everybody on the live stream. I think we're about a little bit more than 14 seconds, but okay. All right. Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. Let me just change the bandwidth here down to 60. Terrible. All right, whenever you're ready, I'm ready. Hey, everybody, welcome to another This Week in Startups. I'm your host, Jason Calacanis, and we host this show twice a week. You can follow us at youtube.com/thisweekin, or you can search for This Week in Startups in any of your favorite podcasting apps. The show is on SoundCloud, Spotify, Overcast, and of course, the Apple and Google podcasting apps. If you want to be a hero, go ahead and review the podcast and go ahead and tweet it. That is always helpful. One of the things that we don't hear a lot about is what's going on in Africa in relation to technology and startups. Once in a blue moon, I hear about something going on there, but not a ton. And I was blown away when I met Jeremy Johnson from Andela. That's pronounced Andela, Andela, like Mandela, as in Nelson. And they were founded in 2014. They have over 1,300 employees. And those employees are software engineers in Africa, in cities like Lagos, Nairobi, Kampala. And what Andela does is they partner with high-growth startups and large tech companies like IBM, Viacom, Gusto, GitHub, and SeatGeek. The firm has over 1,300 employees. Let that sink in for a second. The majority of those are developers in Africa, in some of the largest cities. And today I hope we can talk about the continent of Africa and then drill in and maybe educate the audience on misconceptions we might have, as well as, and there's many, and as well as just getting an update on where different cities are at, because we know that Africa is really a large range of different
54 different countries.
54 different countries, but there's also, and so anyway, welcome to the program, Jeremy Johnson.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Jason.
You've raised over $81 million from investors. It's super impressive, including the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Salesforce Ventures, Spark Capital, my friends over there, Omidyar Networks, GV, which is Google Ventures, ARM, and Future Perfect. Tons of people have invested in your company. But let's talk about Africa, the continent. What led you to want to create a software consultancy, development firm, outsource firm? I don't know how you like to refer to yourself, in Africa. Most people would say Eastern Europe. India was the classic place to outsource to. A lot of people are talking about Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, and other places in South America. You chose Africa. Why?
Yeah, we started in Africa for a very simple reason. Our founding principle and premise is that brilliance is evenly distributed. And if you believe that, then all of a sudden, Africa isn't an odd selection, it's the obvious selection.
Huh.
What people often fail to realize is how rapidly growing the tech scenes are in countries like Nigeria and Kenya, as well as Uganda, as well as Rwanda. And in each of these countries, you have, yes, early stage, but rapidly growing tech scenes that have brilliant engineers that are excited about being able to plug into the technology world. Andela creates a vehicle for that. And we do that by also being able to then, as we help scale engineering teams with international companies, invest in cultivating additional talent across the continent. So it's a way, in many ways, to unlock that human potential and prove that brilliance is evenly distributed, while also solving one of the bigger challenges that, most of, my guess is, your viewers and, me in previous companies and my friends struggle with, and that's how do you find great technical talent?
Right.
And it's immensely challenging and getting worse.
So I think we could all agree brilliance could come from anywhere. Mm-hmm. Brilliance, though, most people would think, maybe in countries with education systems that maybe were, have been around longer, maybe more prestigious universities. What is the educational infrastructure like in these countries, and how has it changed? Because I do think that people largely would view Africa and say maybe they don't have the educational infrastructure, maybe the word pipeline, I don't know if that's a triggering word for some people. How has that changed over time? And then also talk a little bit about instability and governments there, because there is also the perception, I think maybe Rwanda comes to mind. Is it safe in Rwanda? Has it changed, right? Military coups. That's some of the things that people, I think, when you start talking about African nations, start thinking. How stable are the governments in the countries and where you are? And then what's the education system like? Are you coming in there and having to build out this infrastructure for education, or are the governments helping with that? Or are they already there and we just don't perceive it as Westerners?
Yeah, it's. I'll take the education one first and then move into sort of government reaction. On the education front, if we take a step back and think about the startups that we know and love, and you think about their best engineers, it's not all that uncommon for them to be either college dropouts or self-taught.
Sure.
When you think about the world's best engineers, they're not usually saying, like, Carnegie Mellon is a place that made me a great engineer. Carnegie Mellon's a great university, but universities really struggle when it comes to training software developers and training technologists. And there are a bunch of structural reasons for that. But
what do you think those structural reasons are?
Well, first of all, you've got an 18-month technology life cycle where you've got different you've got different technology stacks that are evolving rapidly. Over the past 18 months, all of a sudden, we've had like a huge shift from people being interested in Angular to moving to React.
Right.
If you are a university, you're getting feedback every once in a while from students at the end of a course, and you might look at it and iterate on it, but there's no way you can keep up with the changes in that landscape.
Yeah, they're teaching Cobalt and Fortran and Pascal.
And I'm sure there are a handful of banks that really appreciate the fact that those things still exist in some class somewhere, but very few startups do. And so you combine that with the fact that how you learn computer science in university is very different from how you actually build world-class software. And you end up with a system that is useful in terms of fundamentals, but you still get someone coming out of a CS degree at MIT needing to spend 6 months on site at Google or Facebook in order to get to the point where they're productive.
And that's why we've seen here in the United States, code schools have become effective.
Well, maybe. They've got their own series of challenges.
Yeah, what do you think of code schools? Because these are typically $10,000, 12 weeks, 36 weeks. Can you train a programmer in that amount of time or not?
So you're certainly not going to get to anything resembling an expert level in that period of time. The biggest challenge, though, is the pace of learning is going to be in part driven by the people you're surrounded with. And so when you look at the best work environments or the best academic environments in the world, they care deeply about making sure that everyone you're surrounded with is really smart, really driven, and going to push you, because that becomes part of the foundation of the culture. And if the culture is consistently learning and growing, then you're going to feel like it's natural for you to consistently learn and grow. And so the challenge you get with many of the code schools is it's who can put $10,000 on a credit card to get in, as opposed to Andela, where 1% of applicants are accepted into Andela. 1%.
And so do you have a code school, and do you look for people with raw potential, or are you just skimming the cream and saying, who are the best developers in each country? Let me, give them the best paying, most interesting work. How do you scale to this many employees?
Yeah, we're absolutely cultivating talent, but we care actually much more about long-term potential, aptitude, problem-solving ability to take feedback, ability to give feedback, than we do about whether or not someone has quite frankly, an academic degree of any kind. Now, software development is a somewhat unique field where that is sort of more obvious than it might be in other areas. And so about half of Andela developers do have prior, like an academic degree in computer science or electrical engineering. So it is certainly not a rarity, but at the same time, it's not a requirement at all. We actually had learned about this a couple weeks ago. We had a security guard at a previous office in our Lagos, Nigeria campus apply over and over and continue learning more each time, trying to get into Andela as a software developer, and eventually was accepted into the Andela Fellowship. Now, that fellowship does have, as you were asking before, a roughly 6-month period where a developer is proving mastery over 1,000 different learning objectives, combining both technical skills as well as soft skills, the majority of which they probably haven't experienced before, regardless of how much exposure they have, because we think of this as it's our developer framework. We think of it as the foundation of what makes a great distributed software developer, which isn't always the same as what makes a great team member on site also. And that's a critical part of why Andela works, is helping to cultivate talent that also knows how to work in a distributed way.
When are they, if they come into the fellowship, when are they ready to be billed out, for work with American companies and be competitive with the talent, let's say in Silicon Valley or New York or Austin or Seattle? When would they hit that level, do you think?
That for us is usually somewhere between 6 and 8 months into Andela.
Got it. So you have you have to make a pretty big investment in people, and constant investment. And then what do you? Well, actually, let's do a quick break. But when we get back from the break, I want to get back into the misconceptions or updates that we should all know about the political situation in different countries in Africa that you're operating in, and how you manage that, and what's the reaction of those countries. Totally. Which is fascinating, I think, in and of itself, how much progress has been made. But then I also want to get into the business model. What does it cost for a developer there versus America? What do you bill them at? And what's the margin on this business? Is this something where, SeatGeek can save money, or they can just pay the same but expand the number of developers they have access to? Let's answer those questions when we get back on This Week in Startups.
Sounds great.
Boom.
Great.
Good?
When you come back and you reintroduce Jeremy, can you also mention Zuckerberg's
Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah.
Do you have a tissue I could use, or like something just to blot? It's a little bit warm.
Sure.
I got it.
Oh, thank you.
It's done. I got it.
Yep. All
He
good.
wants to blot. He's getting a little heat there.
Oh my goodness. Are you sweating under the lights there? Sorry, Jeremy.
A little bit. All good.
Our high pressure
It's a very professional system. I just overheat easily as a person.
Yeah. I think the LEDs might be better. I guess we're using these tube ones. I don't know if they throw off a lot of heat or not. All right. 3, 2, 1, when you're ready. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. I'm your host, Jason Calacanis. My guest today, Jeremy Johnson. You can follow him on Twitter, Jeremy J. And he is the co-founder and CEO of Andela. That's spelled Andela. And you can see them at andela.com and on Twitter at Andela. Founded in 2014, $81 million in investment, including from this software developer, Zuckerberg. Here he is in, what city is this?
That is in Lagos, Nigeria.
Lagos, Nigeria. And the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is an investor.
They are.
Now, that's their kind of nonprofit, but also social investing or impact investing arm.
Yeah, they think of it as impact investing. And as far as I know, we've got to pay them back. So I certainly don't think it's fully nonprofit.
Maybe like an evergreen fund is how they look at it.
Exactly.
That was the criticism of it. I thought that was unfair criticism when they were like, Zuckerberg's doing this $50 billion. Zuckerberg and his wife are giving away $50 billion, and they did an LLC. F those guys. And I was like, he's giving away $50 billion. Why are we criticizing it? Like, no, it has to be to nonprofits and in a nonprofit format. I'm like, why does it have to be in a nonprofit format? Like, why can't he? I mean, for-profit businesses like yours can make a bigger impact than a nonprofit because you have sustainable jobs. Yeah. So they invested a lot of money.
Indeed. They're one of our larger investors.
Got it. 81 million raised to date. They're the largest?
They're not the largest individually, but they're up there. So they led our Series B.
Right.
And so Spark Capital led the A, and they led the B after that. I think they were their first lead investment out of CZI.
Amazing. Yeah. How did you wind up meeting them? How does that go down?
I ended up meeting a woman named Vivian Wu, who is the head of their sort of the venture arm of CZI. She'd been working with Mark and Priscilla for a handful of years before that, and known them for many years. And when we first were introduced, it was this small summit for folks in technology related to education and ed tech, and we were connected, and I just thought it would be an interesting conversation. At that point, they'd never led around, so I didn't think of it as a potential lead investor long term, but rather just as a somewhat obviously influential name and presence in the software development and tech world.
Sure.
Just good friends to have. And,
oh, for sure.
We ended up just hitting it off. Vivian, couple months later, asked us to come out and sit down with Mark and talk through what their plans were with CZI and what they were trying to do, and that turned into a conversation about whether or not it would make sense to actually think about them leading our next round. And we went back and forth on it. It wasn't immediately obvious. Actually, one of the things we were concerned about was, would it be perceived as fluffy, basically. One of the things that is a perpetual, I'd say, challenge for us is like our partners. We work with 150 different companies around 11 countries and 55 cities. You name some of them. They're some of the top tech companies in the world. Those engineering leaders are not working with us because they like our mission.
They're not trying to get like a gold star or cookie and high five to feel good about themselves. This isn't like Live Aid where we're like trying to help Africa from starving. This is they need developers.
They have a real problem to solve, and we can help them. And it's great that we can advance our mission by solving that real problem, because quite frankly, the world of people that need great talent is way bigger than the world of people that want to help us advance the mission of proving that brilliance is evenly distributed and has nothing to do with race, gender, or nationality. Right. Like that's actually a good thing structurally.
Let's not get into it, because the bell curve may show that different populations might have up to 1 or 2% difference in intelligence, which means nothing when it comes to being a developer, by the way.
Yeah, but
it's a huge controversy right now.
And also the testing is really difficult to do effectively. And so if you're looking at 1 to 2% difference, it effectively means nothing, which is just not how the world operates,
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that this is controversial, that there could be a difference in intelligence scores across different populations when people can hold their breath for 5 minutes from some places in the world and other people are taller or shorter or fatter or skinnier. It makes no difference.
Large numbers. The shortest person in the world is Chinese, and the tallest person in the world is Chinese.
Right. There you go.
It is entirely a function of just the number of people on the planet. Yeah. And across Africa, you have the youngest, fastest growing population on the planet. It's 1.2 billion people. You have a huge number of extraordinarily talented people.
Yeah, and if there is any difference on the margin, all that should do is inform us that it is inconsequential and that we want to make opportunities available to everybody. And
the world is better if we do.
And the world is better if we do. Of course it is.
You think about the challenges facing not just the Facebooks, Googles, Salesforce of the world. Yes, they've got real challenges from a talent standpoint, but so does every startup you've ever heard of. The world needs more talent and is moving towards distributed. Combine those things together, and the notion of having this giant population of extraordinary people able to engage as great full-time team members is so obvious.
Give me an honest answer here. Why do you think this didn't happen before you started doing it?
Because it sounds crazy to people, because they are spending a lot of time watching the media and have an utterly distorted view of Africa as a continent. And as a result, this just didn't seem as obvious as it is and will seem in the future.
Right. Let's talk about the arbitrage that you're doing. You're doing geographic arbitrage. It's expensive to live in San Francisco.
I've heard.
There's massive competition. It's cheaper to live in Eastern Europe, or it's cheaper to live in Tokyo. I don't know if you saw that New York Times article. Developers are moving to Tokyo because it's cheaper than San Francisco, and it's a better city because it's cleaner and cooler, and San Francisco is horrible.
Good for
but putting
Tokyo.
all that, I thought
smart.
that was, when they say Tokyo is
there's some
You can
problems.
do financial arbitrage by moving to Tokyo, which is the really expensive city. San Francisco is completely and utterly broken in terms of experiences. But what does it cost you for, let's say, a seasoned developer there versus, let's say the average seasoned developer here, which would run, what, 125, 150 here in San Francisco? 150. What does that developer get paid in Africa or Eastern Europe? And how does that comparison work? And then how do you build them out?
There's certainly a cost of living difference.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's actually not the reason that companies choose to work with us, which, quite frankly, I've been a little bit surprised by. But what we found over and over is if you believe us and talk to our existing partners, then the fact that an Andela developer and working with Andela will start at $4,500 a month is an extraordinary deal. And if you don't believe us, it doesn't matter, because the notion of working with a developer that isn't going to be a great team member is just annoying. And so
These are
it's
not
actually
price
negative.
sensitive companies. Like if it's $4,500 a month or $5,500 or $35 or $65, it actually doesn't matter. What matters is
it going to be a great developer?
Yeah,
You're going to love having this person on your team.
That is the test. So
Exactly.
you can find developers for $55K a year that would cost $100, $150 here in the States. Something in that range.
Yeah, you're in the ballpark. It's in that ballpark.
So about 50 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, you actually look at different parts of Lagos or Nairobi. There are actually parts of the cities that are not San Francisco expensive, but that are actually really expensive because there is so much growth in the ecosystem. And that's just not part of the common perception here yet, which is exactly why you're going to have to come and visit at some point.
I'm down.
People need to know.
How did you get Zuckerberg to come? I mean, it's a big trip, right?
I wish I could say that we got him to come, but he
volunteered it or something, or he was there anyway.
They decided to come out themselves, and we were obviously happy to host. But that was a trip they wanted to take. He hadn't been to the continent before, and it's the youngest, fastest growing on the planet. By 2040, half of everyone graduating high school on the planet will be African.
I'm sorry. Wait, say the statistic again.
By 2040, half of every person graduating high school on the planet will be African. It is crazy.
So population growth there is crazy
relative to every other continent on the planet. It's completely crazy.
That is extraordinary population growth.
And yet no one talks about it.
Nobody talks about it. Let's talk about the political reaction to what you're doing there. How does it look for a white guy from Silicon Valley to come out there and start a company there? Do they say, oh, you're welcome here? Or do they look at you as like maybe you're trying to take advantage of what's going on there? How is that looked at? I'm curious.
I don't know.
Because they've had a bad experience with some countries, right? China or the European countries have been considered predatory. Am I wrong? And I've heard that.
There's a lot of controversy around China's investment in Africa. They're funding a lot of infrastructure development in a way that does seem to be pretty predatory.
Just high margin loans, or you have to use our equipment kind of situation?
Actually, it's even crazier with China because they're taking low margin loans from the World Bank and then using the same money to be able to then loan it back out at a higher margin. But that's
crazy.
Yeah, it's international economics is a fascinating space.
Yeah. So how are you looked at there? Do they look at you as a champion, or do they look at you as did they look at you with like a little bit of concern, like why are you here?
Well, so Andela, we had 6 co-founders at the beginning, and 2 were from Nigeria, 1 from Cameroon, 2 from the U.S., and 1 from Canada. And so I actually think of this as one of the most important things for us across the board as a company. There's no way I, as a single co-founder, could have done this. I knew almost nothing about the continent when we started. I had a deep history in education technology. The last company took public in 6.5 years. Like we were... I understood the ed tech space. I did not understand.
What was the company you took public?
It was called 2U.
2U, what was it?
It still is very high quality infrastructure for online degree programs for top tier U.S. universities.
Oh wow!
And so when it came to Andela, I knew at the outset that if this was going to work, we needed to bring together a very diverse group of people from both Africa and the U.S.
Got it.
And
so that would definitely increase the amount of comfort level. It's
Yeah,
not
we
just
don't-
a
we
bunch of folks from America trying to skim the cream and take the best
That's
talent.
exactly right. That's exactly right. There certainly were concerns around brain drain because people looked at India and looked at people sort of leaving the country. One of the benefits of the Andela model is that people don't have to leave their country.
Yeah.
So you're able to invest in human capital, to invest in the next generation of leaders without those people then needing to leave the country. And obviously that's a pretty high quality set of circumstances.
Stability. There is a perception that there's been a lot of turnover in governments or instability in Africa. Is that perception outdated that people have, or is it very country by country, which is what I would assume, and very region specific? And then how does it impact your business, if at all?
So it is partially just a function of it varies dramatically country by country, and partially outdated. When it comes to Nigeria, Kenya are two largest countries right now. There are political complications, but we've got some political challenges in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, I might have noticed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's
But these are
becoming-
functioning democracies?
They are functioning democracies.
Yeah.
Certainly by now U.S. standards. They
Yes.
are functioning democracies.
As our democracy deprecates, suddenly other democracies are now on par with us.
They look like remarkably highly functioning democracies,
Right.
actually.
Yeah.
And so the political landscape has been interesting because we're investing so much in these countries and investing in the next generation of leaders who don't have to leave their country in order to take part in the program.
It's a great pitch to them.
The political response has been, can we come take pictures at your campus? Now that has been complicated because you can only host so many people. But you had the vice president of Nigeria, it's a country of 200 million people, come to visit a couple months ago. You've had the president of Nigeria mention us in a couple different speeches. And this is in part because we have such a diverse group of co-founders, we don't think of ourselves as an American company. We don't think of ourselves as a Nigerian company. We think of ourselves as a global company that has deep roots in both the U.S. and Africa. And as a result of bringing these cultures together, we've been able to build something that most people thought was impossible.
Oh, they're your co-founder too.
Yeah, there you go.
Nice, good-looking group of folks. San Francisco, New York, Lagos. Lagos? Am I pronouncing it?
Depends who you ask. Lagos,
Lagos.
is the most official, but most people say Lagos.
Lagos is what I've heard.
Yeah.
But it's Lagos.
Lagos would be if you were in
Lagos.
Nigeria talking to a
Gos.
Nigerian. Yeah.
It's almost French, Lagos.
It actually comes from Portuguese.
Portuguese, yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like a romantic language. Nairobi, obviously, and Kampala. So you're in 3 cities in Africa, the majority of folks, and you added 2 more?
Yeah, we're in, we have Andela centers in 3 different cities, and we announced the 4th, Kigali, about a month and a half ago.
All right, when we get back from this final break, I want to find out what the governments are doing there to support you. In other words, now that you've got 3 or 4 cities cranking, 5 cities cranking, are the governments now coming to you and saying, hey, we'll pay you to educate and create this workforce, find the brilliant people, and then mentor them up when we get back on This Week in Startups? Good?
Awesome.
How are we doing so far, Jackie?
We're doing great.
You want me to jump into the bell curve a little more and just touch the 3rd rail? Just jump on that? Oh, boy.
Yeah, I was hoping you would.
I would like to interview Charles Murray, actually. The bell curve guy.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's an interesting conversation. Like, I heard him on Sam Harris's podcast. Like, it's very, like, minor. And he's like, it's such a minor difference that it doesn't actually matter.
I think he just wants to matter.
He does.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think so maybe he rubs people the wrong way, but like I've heard excerpts from the book, I haven't finished it, but having read some of it and read the critical parts, if anybody wrote it, you would just be like, well, this isn't a problem. This isn't problematic. Like, there's a study that was done. People are 1 or 2% different by population. Like, and it makes no difference because the environment is a much bigger factor.
Yeah. It certainly shouldn't be something you'd make hiring decisions based on, for instance.
It would be impossible to. It would be
Yeah,
stupid.
it would
It would be
insane.
completely illogical. It would make no statistical sense to do it. So it's almost like, here's what the statistics say. It's not relevant. Is literally what the bell curve book says, right? Like, so then, but everybody is chasing him off campus and physically attacking him. It's like, that's a little bit crazy.
A little aggressive, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely intelligence research there's a lot of questions about what it actually is testing for, of course.
Yeah.
But there is no way that intelligence is evenly distributed is the only thing that is not hereditary. It's impossible for it to not be somewhat hereditary. It has to have some,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to have major. It couldn't have statistical significance. Like height, unless you're playing basketball, your height really does not matter. Or being CEO. Okay, let's go. Or you're running for president. You have to be over 6 feet.
Then height is really important.
Dukakis. 3, 2, 1, me. Hey, everybody. We're having a fabulous discussion, educating ourselves with what's going on in Africa across, would you say, 54 countries in Africa?
54 countries,
54.
1.2 billion people.
1.2 billion people. So the continent is as big as India or China, roughly.
And growing much faster.
And growing faster. Educate us also on the AIDS epidemic, because my understanding is that is still taking time and is still a huge challenge across large parts of Africa.
This is one of those things that is certainly still an issue in a number of countries, but is much less of a discussion point or area of concern the way it was, a couple decades ago.
Yeah.
In many ways, similar to the U.S. It's tough because a lot of the conversations, whether it's AIDS or Ebola, will focus on, will sort of try to take the media and focus on things that are inherently scary because it's good for getting clicks. And ultimately, the real story of what's happening across Africa is you've got 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world. You have extraordinary people and ecosystem development, and this is an area where China's getting it right as they realize that. They want to invest in Africa because they recognize just how important it's going to be for the future. The U.S. is way behind on this.
And we're now going into a nationalistic, isolationist period in our history, the first of our history.
Way behind in trying to figure out if we can push ourselves further back.
And Europe has had a nationalistic movement. Our people first, your people never.
It's too bad immigration never did anything for our country.
Accept everything, right? It's like
precisely.
It's like
God, that's the part that I missed.
Yeah, it's like if you just look at our generation, Elon, Sergey, just go across the board. Steve Jobs' father, we would literally not have Apple, Tesla, and Google just off the top of my head, just before we even get anywhere. Those 3 companies don't exist if the immigration policy we have now existed in 1980.
People completely miss that you look at the founding teams of the top companies across Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Consistently, you have huge both diversity and immigrants coming in. It is the founders of the Fortune 500, founders of unicorns, founders of the most successful high-growth startups across the board.
And if they're not immigrants, their parents probably are.
Yeah.
So even if it's Elon's from South Africa, Sergey, I'm not sure exactly where he's from, but I know he immigrated. And then Steve Jobs' parents, it's either one generation. It's typically, either the person or their parents immigrated. There's almost nobody who's 5th generation, and I'm going to start a unicorn. I don't know why that is. I think it's probably the trust fund screwing things up. But
I have no comments on it.
Yeah, exactly. So our governments now, I would suspect that once governments see you making this huge impact, finding talent, nurturing talent, employing talent, refining that talent's ability to, go from being, average to exceptional, they must be begging you to come to their city/country. Are you at the point where these cities are willing to pay you to build out offices and talent and pay you to? Oh, Moscow. Sergey was from Moscow.
So it certainly wasn't part of our original thinking, but you're also absolutely right that over the past couple of years, and in particular over the past year, we've had well over a dozen different countries reach out and say what would it take to get you to bring Andela to the country, and so our first actual government partnership is with Rwanda, the most recent addition, and in that one, the key part of it was we've had thousands and thousands of applicants from the 50 countries across the continent that we don't operate in. And we've tried in some cases. For instance, we've had a handful of applicants from Uganda that got into Andela, Kenya before Uganda opened. We've had some folks from Togo as well as Ghana get into Andela, Nigeria. But work visas are a real challenge. Like, it's just
They
a
don't
pain in
have
the
like
ass.
an EU type system where you can bounce from country to country. Everybody makes their own rules.
Yes, there is an African Union, but it has not. It is nowhere near as sort of consolidated as the EU. And as a result of that, the only country that actually is really open about this, they're actually the most open in the world, is Rwanda. And so Rwanda basically said, we want you to build a Pan-African hub here, and we will make it so anyone who can get into Andela, any developer accepted in Andela, immediately can have a work permit in Rwanda.
See, this is the smartest thing ever.
It's so smart.
Merit-based immigration is something that, it's interesting when you think about our discussions. National discourse here in America is just gone. But if you said to 100 Americans, do you think we should have merit-based immigration, or some portion of our immigration should be merit-based? There would be no argument. 100% of people, because most developed worlds, I believe Canada, Australia, are very much based on merit-based. And then you'd want to have people who are refugees who can't get in because they were going to be tortured or imprisoned or murdered in their own country. And then you want to have some lottery. But to use you as the filter and say, hey, listen, they're going to create jobs, and those jobs will create startup companies eventually, and those startup companies will then create alumni, and those alumni will then create venture capitalists, and the flywheel gets going. That's such a no-brainer. And we're talking about hundreds of people, right? We're not talking about tens of thousands that are going to be taking your jobs and your factory jobs or whatever. These are people who will wind up creating companies eventually.
Every high-paying tech job creates 5 additional jobs in the economy. There have actually been 2 different studies, one done around Apple in Cupertino, and another done in Rwanda not in Rwanda, across Africa by Dahlberg.
Wait, explain how that works.
So what ends up happening is every time you have someone in, San Francisco making a couple $100,000, and it's a new job that didn't exist before, that person is going to buy a car. They're going to go to restaurants. They're going to hire babysitters. They're going to
nannies.
hire exactly. Like, they're going to need additional support and services that wouldn't otherwise be needed in the economy. And so that's actually the statistic. Every high-paying tech job creates 5 additional jobs around it in the economy.
See, this is another part of our crazy discourse right now. What you've described is trickle-down. Now, if I called it trickle-down, people would be like, oh my God, there's no such thing as trickle-down, or trickle-down is everything. It's like, okay, hold on a second.
Let's take a step back.
Let's all take a step back. Let's just look at logic.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It's like, if a high-paying job is created and that person is going to spend all that money on their lifestyle, like, it's going to get splashed around. And then those people will then spend money, and that's called
An economy?
It's called an economy, and they also call it monetary velocity. I didn't know this term, but monetary velocity is a very important term. It's like, if people just sit on their money, this is why we have inheritance taxes. Speaking of our fine president, who apparently paid 5%, he paid 10% of the tax. I am
Getting
shocked.
out of a $500 million tax bill.
I am shocked. That
again,
Trump,
no comment.
no comment. I don't want to make this political, but I am shocked and flabbergasted that anybody would ever accuse Donald Trump of not paying his full share of inheritance tax.
It's totally mind-boggling.
It is an impossibility to me. But it would make sense, and it would make sense in a developing country or city. Is it okay to call? By the way, let me just ask on behalf of everybody. I know saying third world is considered derogatory. We don't use that word anymore.
I would call it emerging economies.
Emerging,
but
and some people say developing.
Yeah, developing. I don't think is completely taboo. It's certainly not. It's certainly not calling something third world.
Okay, so third world is an insult. Don't say
Yeah,
it.
let's not do that.
Emerging is optimistic and aspirational,
And I think reasonable also.
and reasonable because they are growing.
Faster than
And
almost anyone else.
developing is similar to emerging, but developing would state that they're underdeveloped, and there might be a backhanded compliment in there.
That is my perception. I'm certainly not an authority on this, to be clear.
You know what?
but
I think it's good to talk about the words people use, because if people
they matter.
they do matter, and if people are offended, you should take that into consideration when you use words. Now, I don't think we have to worry about I mean, it might be getting a little crazy with the trigger warnings and microaggressions at times. Leave it aside. But I do think it's right for people to understand exactly how developed these countries are becoming. When it comes to technology in the hands of citizens, describe for me and the audience what Nairobi is like, or Lagos. Lagos?
Lagos.
Lagos.
Yeah.
Lagos.
So
What is Lagos like if you were to compare it to San Francisco, the most modern of cities, or Tokyo?
So, starting with Nairobi, you've had mobile money be the norm for the past decade.
Okay.
Well before it was the norm anywhere in the
So
U.S.
Venmo, PayPal, and then what do they have in Kenya? The M-Pesa?
M-Pesa,
It's
yeah.
Kenya, right?
It's
Am I
Kenya,
correct?
Yeah. Operating in a couple other countries, but started in Kenya.
Yeah.
In Kigali, it's the first fully 4G city in Africa. And
Kigali?
was one Kigali.
Kigali.
And one
What
of the
country
first,
is Kigali?
That's in Rwanda.
That's
capital
Rwanda.
of Rwanda.
That's the capital.
And
Thank you
was
for
one of
educating
the
me.
first. Yeah, don't feel bad. We're all learning.
Yeah.
It was one of the first fully 4G cities in the world.
Wow.
It's extraordinary what's happening
So
there.
everybody's got broadband phones, but they may have switched. The other perception I hear all the time, and I hear people who are authorities on Africa who've never been there here in the United States quote stuff, but is this perception that people have, or this, I don't know, this meme or this concept that they skipped a generation, they skipped broadband and they just went to 4G, 5G? Is
Leapfrogging.
Leapfrog? Is that correct in these countries? They don't have broadband or fiber at home, but they do have a 4G connection on their phone, and they use 4G as their connection?
Yeah, it's actually a huge opportunity for the continent. It's
But it
one
is
of the
true.
reasons. It's
Yes.
completely true. And what it means is that you're able to skip much of the sort of super expensive infrastructure. It doesn't mean all. There's a lot of infrastructure still needed, to be clear. But if you can skip some portion of the infrastructure and move directly to, for instance, 4G wireless, then you're actually able to develop in a way that the sort of more developed economies aren't able to do, because they'll be held back by it. And so it's actually a pretty extraordinary opportunity for the continent.
All right. When I see all this activity as an angel investor, I think, okay, Andela's got all these developers. Okay, these developers are helping SeatGeek. Okay, now they're watching. They're probably, reading, about tech companies here. They might be watching This Week in Startups. And
Many are.
when do we start to see startups emerge from Africa that either hit unicorn status or export culture and products to America?
So we're actually already seeing it. This
We
is
are.
one of those the future is here, it's just not widely distributed kind of things.
Yeah.
In this case, you actually have, we had, my co-founder was at TechCrunch Disrupt a couple weeks ago, and while there, ran into CTO and co-founder of company Fiber in Lagos. That CTO is part of our first cohort in Andela, presenting at TechCrunch Disrupt here in San Francisco.
Amazing.
You've had
What does this company do? Fiber, it's called?
Fiber. Yeah, it's think of it as a simplified way to find and rent apartments in Lagos. It's
So it's
super
Redfin
important.
or Zillow for apartments.
Yeah, a little bit more like a shared living kind of, almost more like Common.
Got it. So Airbnb, somewhere between Airbnb,
somewhere between Airbnb and Common.
Zillow,
Yeah.
Common, whatever.
So if you need an apartment in Lagos, for some mid period of time, check out Fiber. Great company.
Fiber, PHIBER?
FIBRE.
FIBRE.
Yeah. Exactly. And so you're actually already starting to see it. You've got there was 500.
So have you thought about doing an angel fund or incubator for your graduates?
I'm waiting for you to offer to help us with it.
Well, I think
Don't worry, we get a couple.
No.
You get a couple years first.
here's what I would say. We are interested in one of the things I've learned as an angel investor is to never underestimate anybody.
Yeah.
You underestimate people at your peril. It's very easy to sit there when people are early in their career and point out, they got a squeaky voice, they got acne. It's like criticizing a teenager is what I tell people. Like,
Completely.
you can sit there and criticize the teenager, but they're going to be an adult soon, and they're going to be dunking on you and creating real shit in the world. And it's very easy to be like, oh yeah, this person's a little awkward. Well, Uber's first app, Uber Taxi, if you go look it up, it looked not refined.
Mm-hmm.
And then, year 3, all of a sudden it was like they're winning design awards. And then, year 10, they've changed the world. And I think for emerging markets, if the thing I typically see in emerging markets or markets that are not, let's say, Silicon Valley or Stockholm, Sweden, is that the founders, because they don't see anybody who's made it, they don't know what's possible. So now if you haven't seen a unicorn company, then where are you going to set your sights? You're going to set your sights at just maybe getting a job. But then when you start to see people build like small businesses, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to set my targets at building a small business. Here in Silicon Valley, if you build a $100 million business, you're like, God, I got to get to work because I don't have a $1 billion business because everybody's got a $1 billion business. I think that's the main thing I saw when I was in Sydney was so many great founders. We had Launch Festival there this year, and we're coming back next year. But I told them all, you're all trying to build businesses. And I had the same exact experience in Tokyo last week when I went there for my book tour. They're all trying to build businesses that grow to $10 to $25 million in revenue in Tokyo or Sydney. And, they're not thinking about the global stage.
So that's fair, but that also would fairly describe China 8 years ago. And so these things change pretty quickly.
I agree.
And so if I were, let's say, a prolific angel investor right now,
yes,
I would be very actively looking at Africa as a place for investment, and I'd be looking at Andela developers as future technical founders.
I'm in. I mean, I basically, when I got back from Sydney, we had 8 companies that we provisionally accepted to the incubator. We wound up closing 3 of them so far are in the incubator. You have to do due diligence. They have to want to spend 3 months here. It's a little bit of work. And then after this Tokyo trip, I found 2 or 3 companies. And so we actually think we can be a bridge in that way of like, you start your company, you get your MVP, you get some traction in your market. Oh, now you want to come to America? Great. Come to the Launch Incubator and we'll put $100K in and we'll spend 12 weeks with you, introduce your investors, and then help you learn how things are grown here to tremendous success. So I agree with your premise that in 6, 7, 8 years, these markets will develop and there'll be an example for them to follow because it happened in Stockholm, Sweden. When everybody saw Spotify, Daniel Ek and his team, Shaq and everybody, I mean, people were very dismissive of Spotify in the beginning. Are you crazy? This is never going to work. Music, Napster 2.0, it'll never work. They'll crush you.
Same thing in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And you get a couple big breakouts. All of a sudden, the entire ecosystem is an overnight success, and there are no overnight successes.
Yeah, there's 2 unicorns in Australia, Canva, and Atlassian. Thank you, Jackie. Emmy Award-winning producer Jackie. And then there's 9 in Stockholm, probably a dozen in New York.
Sounds about right.
Hundreds here. 1 or 2 in LA. 1 or 2 in Austin. It's like, but when they see the example, that's when it gets super, I think that's when it gets super interesting for folks. Talk about language. One of the things that's made Europe very successful in terms of exporting culture to America is that most of the people there will speak English. One of the theories is South America's been hard to build a unicorn because you have so many different languages and different local customs in South America. So hard nut to crack. How do you think about that with Africa? If somebody were to start a company there, would it be easy to go from Kenya to Rwanda, and up and down the continent, or would localization be a lot of work in each market?
So localization is a lot of work because each country is different culturally, but
they are different culturally.
Yes, but it's not because of language. English is the most common language spoken across the continent, the most common individual language.
Got it.
Nigeria,
What percentage do you think?
Official language. You're looking at half the continent.
Got it.
Like Nigeria, official language. Kenya, official language. And by the way, the accent sounds British. They sound like they speak English better than Americans. Rwanda changed the official language from French to English a little over a decade ago. And so you've got a lot of movement towards English, but also a lot of existing infrastructure around English as a just completely common language. I do think that's one of the reasons Latin America has struggled to produce real breakout tech successes. Not that there haven't been some, but I think it's also one of the key advantages and one of the additional reasons that Africa is so obvious when you really unpack it.
Yeah, if you think about if you were going to bring Slack to Africa, I'm assuming it's there.
I mean, we have 1,000 people using it there.
Exactly. It's like, well, if they're already speaking English, and I'm assuming all your courses and mentorship is in English.
Andela is entirely in English at this point.
Entirely. So in order to get into Andela, if you don't speak English, you got to spend a year or two getting up to speed on English.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, the opportunities will be for those who speak English.
Initially, and over time that'll evolve.
You think so?
I do.
But isn't it kind of a requirement for you to get everybody proficient in English because they're going to be working primarily with English-speaking companies?
Yes, and Stack Overflow is written in English. Like the software development world, it's not a requirement, but it's certainly much easier.
You'd be at a huge disadvantage if you can't read Stack Overflow.
That's actually a true statement.
Isn't it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just so... It's almost like when somebody asks you a question about history, they're like, I just search Google, go to the Wikipedia. And when you have a technical question, they're just like, go to Stack Overflow. Just go to Stack Overflow. Then ask me if you don't find it on Stack Overflow. Then I'll answer it. Where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? If you had your druthers, if you hit all the notes you want to hit, you got 1,300 employees already, $81 million raised. I'm assuming you're making tens of millions of dollars now or millions? Where are you at?
We're certainly into the tens at this point.
Tens of millions. It would feel like that with 1,300. Yeah,
and more than doubling year over year. Like we're growing fast. And, you fast forward 5 years, we'll be in the tens of thousands of Andelans full-time.
Andelans, I love it.
Yeah, around the world. We'll probably be operating in a dozen countries.
Tens of thousands of developers. What is the largest number of developers working for a single organization in the world? Is it IBM, Microsoft?
I don't know. You know a cool statistic? I don't
That's
know the
a good
answer
one
to
for
that,
Emmy Award-winning
but I
producer
do
Jackie.
know that there was a study just came out of the largest organizations contributing to open source. And
Google's got to be number one.
They were up there, but Andela was number 19 of all companies on the planet in terms of number of Andela employees contributing to open source on GitHub.
19?
Right above
On
Cisco.
open source. So you're punching way above your weight.
Way above
Well, with
our weight.
1,300, yeah. I mean, there's got to be
Company-
tens of thousands of developers at Microsoft and
Completely.
Google. And
It's a big part of Andela's culture is open source.
Oh, yeah. That makes total sense. Open culture, open source.
Completely.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you educating the audience and myself.
I appreciate having me on. This is great.
Getting some of the myths out of the way, and being so honest and candid about what's going on over there. It really is inspiring to see. And I think one of the things people forget is because we talked about the press and how negative they can be and fake news, whatever. Keeping it from being political, but if it bleeds, it leads. Like there's a constant negative narrative about places in the world. And the truth is, if you read Steven Pinker's books, by the way, just incredible author and thinker, Our Better Angels, a good book for you to start with. The number of people dying, in childbirth, the number of people living in abject poverty, this is all changing radically. Mm-hmm. And what's also changing, and I got a lot of pushback on this when I tweeted, is all the information you want to learn in the world is now available for free online globally. And it wasn't like that just 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it certainly wasn't like that 20 years ago when you and I probably came into the industry, or when I came to the industry, like to try to figure out how startups worked. Nobody knew what a term sheet was. To figure out how artificial intelligence worked or machine learning, you had to get into MIT. There were no books on it. There were no courses you could take. Now all this stuff is free. Are your people taking these free courses from MIT and other stuff in their spare time? Do you find that they're using those resources out there?
So all the time. And it's because of the kind of people that are accepted into Andela. To get into Andela, again, you're going to be in the top 2% aptitude in problem solving of anyone on the planet. And I think it's important to remember as the world continues, as you were saying, it will continue to get better despite
smaller.
Yes, exactly. Despite what the media, despite what it might feel like, I'd say at times.
Yeah.
And as that happens, part of that is being driven by a greater and greater share of those smart-driven people coming into the workforce and by companies having access to it.
Yeah.
And so if there's a dramatic shift that I feel like people should just be aware of, it's that we are moving, whether people like it or not, we are moving towards a distributed world where gaining access to talent is going to be the competitive advantage for companies.
Yep.
They want to be able to then scale around the world. If you want to build for the next billion or just want to scale for the few million around you, you need to be able to find a diverse group of talent, and that requires thinking about distributed.
Yeah.
And so as the world gets smaller, that becomes more obvious. And my hope is that people start to realize that more and more as they think about scaling talent.
I also think it makes the world more equitable if
Completely.
the opportunity in Africa or India or across Asia, across Europe, it just feels more equitable that a person who's smart in Africa can then contribute to something going on at SeatGeek or, one of the other companies you work with, Gusto, GitHub. And all of a sudden you've got people from Andela working with GitHub, and people in Seattle and San Francisco are all working on something together. It makes it very hard for countries to go to war with each other when the fabric of how they work together is so intertwined, because if a war starts between two countries and the economic interest is that this is going to be really bad for those two countries because they're trading, it prevents wars.
Yeah,
it's proven.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
It is the fabric of society that extends beyond just our individual society, but like the global society.
Yeah.
And the reality is that that's not just better for that developer in Africa to be able to work with SeatGeek or GitHub. It's better for SeatGeek and GitHub to also be able to work with them.
Yeah.
Everyone is better off.
Yeah.
And that's the key to it, actually being sustainable, is that the entire world is better by coming closer together and being able to actually work together.
There's only one group that gets screwed. Entitled kids who think that because they were born in America that they're entitled to a job and that it's all going to work out for them. I try to explain this to young people. It's I know that you hit the jackpot by being born in America and your parents are rich or whatever, they got you into college. You're up against a global market for talent. And some of these folks are coming from being very poor and living in the farm. The parents were on farms in China, and now they're in the city. They want to work 60, 70 hours a week. The hours in China are 9-9-6, 9 a.m., 9 p.m., 6 days a week. There are hungry people in the world who want to work at Andela or whatever, and they want to put the hours and time in. And then I see entitled people who are like,
That's true, and that's true, but it's half of it. The other half that's important is that by having those people across the continent of Africa or in China building new services, those entitled kids, their trust fund's going to go a little bit further. And so everyone still benefits because tech is not a zero-sum game. Right. It's accretive. Everyone benefits from having more people actively contributing in the future of the economy.
The more people who own iPhones, the cheaper it gets to make those sensors. Those sensors now then wind up making drones and self-driving cars. I mean, if we didn't have every human on the planet, or the majority of humans on the planet, willing to spend hundreds of dollars every 2 years or $1,000 every 2 years on a smartphone, we would not have the processing power and miniaturization of these sensors that we have now. That is just, it's mind-blowing what it's enabling. People are just making $30, $40 boards that sense everything. I see it when I look at deals. I'm just like, this company would not exist had it not been for 1 billion iOS devices being sold and 2 or 3 billion Android devices being sold. This is standing on the shoulders of that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
All right. So if you're a millennial and you're lazy and entitled, listen, you're not going to be employable, but you're going to have a great smartphone and some great software on it. You'll have incredible apps to distract you as you wonder why you're not competitive in the world. Actually, I'm telling you, there's going to be some parents who want to send their kids to Andela. That's when you know.
It's already happening.
It has? I was about to say, that's when you know you've hit it. This is when we'll know the world has gotten really good, is that the programming team and spirit in, Rwanda is so good that some kid in Orlando is like, can I go to Rwanda and be part of Andela? Because I really want to get a great job in the world.
It's in small numbers right now, but I'm sure we're going to see a lot more.
Americans going to
not going, but asking if they can. Asking if they can apply. And others trying to pay to get in. We've said no to it, but we've had people ask.
To pay?
Yes. Like that.
What is your deal with people? If you train them up, they have to work for you for a year or something, or pay back, or it's just
you've got to pay back the cost of training, but you do that actually in the first couple of years. It's pretty quick, and over time, what matters is creating an amazing environment for someone. Yeah. So, ultimately, it's a culture of learning and growth and development. And yes, it also enables you to then, by paying it back, you get to invest in the next generation to enable someone else to take part in the Andela experience.
Amazing. Well, Jeremy, I'm glad there are people like you out there doing this incredible work and then keeping us educated.
There are 1,300 of us right now.
1,300. I mean, that is just mind-blowing. And I guess you're in spitting distance of profitability or close. You get there if you wanted to?
We're moving in that direction. We could get there if we wanted to.
Yeah. So you're investing. It's great.
Tomorrow there'll be more of us.
Tomorrow there'll be more Andelas. All right, everybody, go check out Andela, ANDELA.com, Andela, and follow Jeremy, Jeremy J. Thank you, Emmy Award-winning producer Jackie, for getting another great guest on the program. We all feel smarter already. And thank you to our partners for supporting the program. And if you want to do something, what can you do? Well, here's what you can do. Just the next time you get an email from us or you're listening to the podcast, tell a friend. You know a friend? Send them this episode and say, hey, listen to this episode. It's great. That's how the show has gotten to over 150, maybe 250 people tuning into every episode from around the world. It was great to be in Tokyo last week and see and meet all these people who listen to This Week in Startups. And same thing happened when we were in Sydney. It means the world to me when you write a review. That's super helpful, especially on iTunes. When you write reviews on iTunes, we move up the rankings is what I understand. I don't know if that's exactly true, but go ahead and do that. If you want to read my book, it's called Angel. It's on the Amazon and the Audible and everywhere else. All right, we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups. Bye-bye. Boom. Nicely done. Great episode.
Thanks, man.
You carried an hour.
That was very
It's not
fun.
easy to carry an hour.
That was very fun.
Great job. Continued success. Yeah, I would love to come at some point. Next time they have some sort of big conference, let me know. I'm going to have my first time